Let's enjoy 3 sounds of the bell together. So our theme for today's explorations is transformation and healing, and taking refuge in the earth. And remembering Sister True Dedication's invitation for us to keep checking in what the present moment feels like for us. I'd like to take a moment to do just that. Let's just take a few nice deep breaths and bringing the awareness to our internal weather. And can we do that with openness and kindness, with warmth, to see what's there? And what we find when we look inside with real honesty is not always pleasant. We don't always have pleasant feelings. We have pleasant feelings, we have unpleasant feelings, and we have neutral feelings. That's how the Buddha described our internal landscape. And when we touch ourselves truly, deeply, and with honesty, we will at times find unpleasant feelings, stress, anxiety, grief. And in Plum village tradition, Thich has invited us to embrace these feelings. Unlike our culture that gives us a zillion of ideas about how to avoid these feelings, how to distract ourselves, Thich has asked us to do the work of transforming mud into lotuses or compost into roses. And how do we do that? The way to practice with unpleasant feelings, the whole range from a mild niggle to a devastating grief, is we recognize what's there. We say, hello, my grief. We embrace, and that means, I love that in this word, part of this word is the word brace. So what we might do habitually is we might brace against difficult feelings. That's how we're wired. That's our stress response, our survival response. there's something in the body where we brace, but we are asked to embrace, to soften, to allow this to be there, because we know in the light of Thai's teachings of non-duality that the difficult stuff is grist for the mill of true peace and true deep love. And then we can, as a third step, look deeply and find out what's at the root of our difficulties. It could be a grief that we inherited from generations of our ancestors. It could be a difficulty that's in our society, that's a collective one. It might not just be my own. So when we look deeply, and that might take more than one meditation, that might take. I had a bereavement many years ago, and in hindsight, I found it took me 4 years to transform this deep grief and sorrow and loss into peace and resilience. And of course, nature is a wonderful resource, certainly in a place like here. I'd love to share a poem with you, which many of you might know. It's The Piece of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's life may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. I come into the peace of wild things. I come into the presence of still water. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. I imagine that's an experience that some of us have had. We go out and maybe with a heavy heart, and we soak up the beauty and nourishment of nature. So the poem suggests that we can have moments of freedom and healing when we're in touch with nature and the wonders of life. And there's a whole science on the effects of nature on our bodies and minds. There's a lovely book called Losing Eden, While Our Minds Need the Wild. I'll put it on the resource list, where I forgot her name who wrote this. The lady compiled all the research on why our minds need the wild and our bodies. And one study that touched me especially, I would like to share with you, was conducted in Chicago, in a very poor part of the city, and they had lots of overgrown plots that were uninhabited, so I don't know how you call that in town planning language, but so the initiative was that all these plots were greened, so whatever was laid bare in the city was overgrown and disused. There were trees were planted and community gardens and benches were put up and flowers. And then they measured that after a while, the gun violence and overall violence was down by 30%. That's a third. That's almost half. And that people who were interviewed shared that they felt much safer going out. Of course, if the violence is drastically down. So I thought that's a wonderful illustration, this study of the effect that the energy of nature has on us. We interact with the earth. We resonate on many levels with beauty, with the life force. I remember a moment this spring, earlier must have been maybe late March, and all of a sudden there is sometimes overnight nature comes out, and there must have been a bit of sunshine, and the next day there were big buds everywhere that hadn't been there before. And I remember sensing the spring, just looking at the buds, and I could feel it in my body. I was very aware of that resonance of, gosh, this green, young green is coming. In the same vein, I remember a cycle trip I did to the West Coast some years ago, and I was acutely aware of my resonance with what I was cycling through. There were areas that were very barren or plantation wood, where there was, well, I can't say there wasn't much wildlife because I was cycling through, but through my senses, through my sense of resonance, I could feel there wasn't much life force. Whereas there were other areas that felt very intact and brimming with life. So we have a resonance with the life force around us, and also with the absence of life force. So in the reading this morning, we have heard that the earth can be a refuge for us. And the phrase taking refuge, that is an active tuning into the earth's solidity and peace. We can, through our feet during walking meditation, we can bring our awareness to the soles of our feet. It's very special when we walk barefoot, but even with shoes on, we can receive the energy of the earth. Thich offered the phrase, we can kiss the earth through the soles of our feet. And I have experienced that then the earth kisses me back. So we can gently put our suffering and stress on the earth for her to transform it into insight and compassion. We can breathe with the earth and allow her to be within and around us, trusting her healing power. And all of that would be part of number 2 here, the embracing. I think we're not taught or shown or modeled how to be with difficult feelings. And so I've been eternally grateful for Thai and the worldwide Sangha, where I could learn how to be with difficulty in a life-affirming way. Not in a destructive way, but in a life-affirming way. And then the magic will happen in whatever length of time transformation and healing. And I'd like to share an example from my own life, how I was practicing like this. This must have been maybe 6 years ago. And that was a time when I had lost my mom. And I was at the same time completing the master's in mindfulness with Aberdeen University. So I was writing a thesis. And it was a very stressful time because I had deadlines. And when my mom's health started to decline, I had wanted to postpone, but she was very firm that she didn't want that. She wanted me. She thought she did me a favor if I kept going. And so when she died, I was faced with just having to juggle these deadlines, and I had no space to give to my inner saying goodbye. And so after a while, I got a tick bite. And then that tick bite developed into this characteristic circular rash that is taken as a symptom of Lyme disease. And initially, I only had very mild symptoms, dizziness, enough to get worried, but not disabling. And this was a summer where I really took refuge in the practice. So I took a break, for starters, and I worked with some wonderful practitioners, including a fantastic homeopath in Germany. And I worked with a book by Arnold Mindell about understanding our body's symptoms, a very holistic book. So that was my way of looking deeply. And what I found was, through looking deeply and embracing, really being there, making time as much as possible, I found that there was shock in my system from my mom's passing that had happened a bit unexpected. And the way it was, I felt just distraught. I hadn't had a chance to say goodbye properly. She died in hospital. So all of that came up, and I sat with it and I walked with it. It was summer, so I went outside all the time in the dunes. And one thing I did was I went swimming every day at Findhorn Beach. I went into the ocean, and it felt like I cried in the salt water, and it felt like the embrace of the ocean. It felt very healing. And so bit by bit, I had these insights. Oh gosh, there is shock in my system. And it felt, by the moment I recognizing, it already eased. Just sheer recognition, there is shock. This was such a hard moment. Already goes a long way towards easing. And I have found this book very helpful, that by Arnold Mindell, that took me by the hand, offered lots of guided meditations, how we can explore our symptoms. And that was like a guided deep looking that gave me many insights. And come September or so, the mild symptoms never got worse. They disappeared. And so transformation and healing occurred. I have huge gratitude for having been shown how to handle the stuff that we get as humans. And what intrigues me is that looking deeply, I understood over time, does not mean thinking hard, trying to fix. Looking deeply, there's a wonderful book by Thich that in its first edition was called Transformation at the Base. It's now called Understanding Our Mind. But transformation at the base means we have mind consciousness, our thinking mind, and we have store consciousness, which has some overlap with, in Western psychology, the subconscious. The store consciousness is the store of all our seeds of love, seeds of pain, seeds of compassion, seeds of anger. And in transformation at the base, now understanding our mind, Thich said transformation happens at the level of store consciousness. We can't will it. What we can do is create conditions. So during that summer, I found the right. It literally fell off the shelf. I wasn't looking for it. It just store consciousness, one could say. I found some great practitioners to work with, and so it's a very intuitive process of tuning in meditation, in walking, with the help of friends, with Sangha, tuning in, sensing what's needed, becoming responsive, trusting that insights will come when they're ready. When the Thich spoke about boiling the potatoes, when the potatoes are cooked, when they're ready, an insight will appear. So in my case, the insight was there's shock in my system. And we are very conditioned to think of our problem-solving mind as the go-to in all situations. And of course it has its place, and it's a wonderful resource also, but transformation and healing in a deeper sense happen at the level of store consciousness. And we can do our best to create good conditions. Again, I heard Thich say once, all that's needed for transformation and healing is time and Sangha. And Sangha standing for being surrounded by mindfulness energy, by this kind of energy that produces insight over time. Retreat is a wonderful resource. Nature is also Sangha. All the nature beings are also a Sangha. Let's enjoy the sound of the bell. Now, when we tune into the earth and into nature, we also find trouble. We can hear, it feels very intact and beautiful, and there's lots of life force, but also Of course, there are places that are suffering. The earth is suffering, as we were breathing with in our Touching the Earth yesterday. And when we tune into the earth, depending on where we are and what is there, we might also touch grief and anxiety and confusion about the state of nature and the earth and the world. And I think that these feelings are an adequate response. So as we resonate, as we would resonate with the dear ones suffering, and we would feel with them, for them and with them. I think it's the same with nature and the earth. We feel for and with the earth. And so this is a good and adequate response to the ecological crisis and to climate crisis. It's okay to feel these things. And how do we do this? How do we feel these things without getting overwhelmed? And again, Plum Village practice has been such a tremendous eye-opener there for me. Here's one other beautiful practice for all kinds of difficulties. I invited us to see ourselves as a tree with really strong roots. So feeling, sensing our roots, the stability that we can, the nourishment that we can get through our roots, and being in touch with this, with the stem of the tree, which is the lower part of our body. So we breathe through our belly, rising and falling. And then if we have this rootedness and groundedness, then the storm can go through our branches without doing any harm because we are grounded. So we can weather the storm if we have enough being in touch with our stem. And so the leaves and branches, that's our thinking mind. We can very easily, I know that's my habit energy. When I have a difficulty, when I'm stressed, I go into thinking as a way of trying to control, overthinking. And Thich says, no, drop that. That is reinforcing the stress. Go into your breathing, sense your stem, sense the roots. There's a beautiful example by Sister True Dedication in Zen and the Arts, where she practiced like this with some really immense, difficult feelings. And after, she said it took her an hour of lying. You can do lying meditation if that's what feels right. She was just belly breathing for an hour lying down. And then she felt, suddenly she felt some calm. And then she came out of meditation, and so back to the problem. Wait a minute, what was the problem again? So some transformation had happened from what looked like a catastrophe, with just some perspective and some groundedness. Suddenly we can handle it. And this little acronym FOFBOK, I love it. It comes from a mindfulness for children's course. I think the .b, mindfulness for children. It stands for feet on floor, bum on chair. And that's another way of saying, let's bring the energy down, let's ground ourselves, feel the feet on the floor, feel the bum on the chair, and our breathing. That can go a long way. And the other tremendously helpful practice for me that I've learned in Plum Village is, can we make our heart big enough so that we can hold both the joy and the suffering? So I loved hearing Thai say, don't wait until you have no more suffering before to feel some happiness, to feel some joy. We might wait for a very long time. So while we're having difficulties, can we still open to the wonders of life, touch the wonders of life, touch joy? And so our suffering has some companions of mindfulness, of joy. And again, I had an experience like a crash course in learning this in Plum Village quite a few years ago. And I went there with my boyfriend at the time, and he chose to split up in Plum Village. And so I was surrounded by beauty, by community. Thai was there, and at the same time I was quite heartbroken, and I was holding this both was present, and both was very strong, and that was a really interesting experience. So Thai has told us that joy and suffering are not separate. They are not different entities. They are two sides of the same coin. They are organic stuff that the suffering can transform into joy. The joy also can transform into suffering if we have too much of the sticky toffee pudding. So none of it is fixed or separate, it's moving all the time. And if we know the art of taking good care of our suffering, of our difficulties, we can, over time, with the help of our practice and breathing and nature and the Sangha, grow beautiful flowers from the mud. Today is a day for us with lots of silence, and often our tender bits that we don't give too much space, maybe during our everyday life, they can come up and raise their head in a day where they get some space. So we don't need to be afraid of this. We're in it together. We can smile at each other. I think we pick up a lot. If someone is looking a bit sad, even without speaking, we can transmit our caring. Our warmth and kindness. We can take our tender parts into a walk if it clears up, or maybe it could even be a rainy walk if we're wrapped up well. And when we look deeply at the roots, means giving space without necessarily thinking at all, then insights will pop up as they do.